Hello, BookTube. Well, as you can see from the tasteful background, I am not at Hyde Cottage. The folks here at the 190-year-old house up in Vermont wanted Frida, and we're a package deal, so she and I are now up here in Vermont. And some of you might be thinking, oh no, but we were really enjoying your library tour. Actually, I don't think any of you were enjoying my library tour, but I thought ahead. I thought of you, my faithful Donohuguenots. And I still am going to do a library tour. I brought the iPad. We're going to go through books that I have had but no longer have and talk about them a little. And we're going to start with this one, which some of you will know really well. Some of you will know this author, Taylor Caldwell. This is her novel, Dear and Glorious Physician. This is the paperback that I had. And it is a historical novel about St. Luke, in which Taylor Caldwell posits that he was a doctor, that he was the son of the Roman governor of Antioch, I think it was, that he travels all over the world seeking first-hand accounts of this Galilean mystic, this Jesus of Nazareth. And it's really good. It's a really, really good novel. I would argue one of Taylor Caldwell's most controlled and enjoyable novels. I'm not going to go on a digression here about how much flapdoodle it's based on. The only reason that Taylor Caldwell does not have Lucanus meeting Jesus and John and all the others is because St. Luke in his gospel starts off by saying explicitly that he didn't, that he is not an eyewitness of what he's writing about, that he's collecting eyewitness accounts. So that's what she has him do. If that line weren't in most of the trustworthy versions of St. Luke, then she would have. But he does meet the Virgin Mary in a very, very wonderful scene. It's actually, some of you, the ones of you who've read this book, will probably have very fond memories of it. It's Taylor Caldwell wrote this, and also a big book called Great Lion of God, which is big and wonderful. And also, with Jesse Stern, wrote a book called I, Judas, that is better than both of them and really, really worth it. So let's see here. We're going to get this to work. Okay, this next one is by Leonard Gardner. This is Fat City. It is not possible to get the lighting to work in this old house, no matter where you go. So we're gonna have to make do. If I put it over here, will that work any better? Not really. No. Well, you can see it clear enough. This is that's the cover of these old. Who was this? Vintage Contemporaries did these very distinctive cover designs. A novel that got a huge amount of praise when it came out. It's an inner city novel. It's an archetypal dude bro novel. It's a boxing novel, as you can see from the cover. It's about an old boxer and a young boxer and the changing nature of the sport and a hustling coach and whatnot. I had a very strong influence on a whole generation of writers. I don't know why it's not better known, unless I think I remember. Maybe some of you would know better than I do. Maybe New York Review of Books reprinted this as one of their series. I'm not 100% sure that I remember that correctly. Okay, this next one has been mentioned on this channel many, many times, but when you're doing a tour through the vanished library, you take what comes next. This is God Knows by Joseph Heller. There, you can't really make it out in the lighting here, but that is the little circle in the middle there is God saying, go figure. But this is Joseph Heller's novel of King David. And it's brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. I did, for maybe Midrash a few years ago, I did an in-depth look at this book in 2 different videos. And again, if I remember and can find them, I will leave links to those down below. It's funny, bawdy. It's incredibly touching. It's sort of playfully anachronistic. David knows perfectly well about the 20th century. He knows perfectly well about how he's been portrayed in history. He knows perfectly well what he looks like in Michelangelo's statue, including one particular detail that is not accurate in the statue. Those of you of the chosen people may know that detail. Thousands of people see it every year, and every once in a while someone comments to the tour guide. Okay, this next one is by Seth Harwood. Don't know why this didn't take off. This is called Jack Wakes Up, and it is, again, a very dude bro type title. It's a kind of an action thriller type book about a Hollywood action star who has one mega successful movie and then just burns out completely on drugs, and torpedoes his career, but he still has all sorts of contacts in Hollywood and is caught up in a story, and it's very lean. It's very well done. I don't know why it didn't become. I don't know why we're not talking about the 10th or 20th novel starring this character, but I don't think we are. I don't think there were more than one sequel, maybe two. Okay. I think we're going back to the 70s. Those of you who remember the 70s may want to strap in. The superscription on the front cover of this is Scotch got them through the day, sex got them through the night, and money got them out of every jam until the Martha's Vineyard Affair by Stan Hart. And there's me and Deb on the cover. You can't really make it out in this lighting, but there are sand dunes there in the background of the Martha's Vineyard Affair. And this is a classic 70s sudzer. Just ridiculous archetypes, silly, over-the-top conversation. Naturally, when I first read this, I got it off a spinner rack at a drugstore, and I read it for the Vineyard color, which is pretty much the last thing you're supposed to read a book like this for, is whether or not the author researched exactly where Oak Street is. But nevertheless, the first time, I think I've read this twice. I read it when it first came out, and then I found it at a used bookstore that couldn't get away from it fast enough. I think they gave it to me for a dime, and read it again. It's wretched. Absolutely wretched. And the second time I went through it just looking the second time I read it was decades later. So you look at a thing like this as a kind of a time capsule after that much time has passed. There was another 70s era sudzer like this with sex on every page, never knowing who's gonna meet up with who. Always there's a villainous millionaire or a washed up movie star or whatnot. I read one of those that I think was called Honolulu or something like that. It was set in Hawaii instead of Martha's Vineyard, because the wily old editors who used to commission these things from writers up and down the eastern seacoast would say, don't give me any schmucks in the Midwest. I want you to set your book where people vacation, because that's where I want them to buy it. I want those sales tied into these things. And this was set in Hawaii right around the same time as this thing. And when you read that thing now, you read it as a time capsule. No one uses any kind of sexual protection. The characters frolic in the ocean way past the surf line. And I think there's one moment in that book. There's a moment in this book as well where a character just offhandedly makes mention of maybe there might be a shark, because this book and that book took place before Jaws. So there's a time capsule element involved, but I don't recommend it. Not that you're ever going to see it, but I don't recommend it if you do. Oh, there's the next one I do recommend. And this is an advanced copy, so a review copy, so that's going to take us back a little. This is Nova by James Boyce. Wow, you can't see that at all. That is just completely gone. I always forget that when I'm here. Maybe this way? No? Oh, there you go. All right, that does it. This is a slim contemporary novel. The cover says the author of MVP. I never read MVP, but the author writes well about high school sports. And this novel centers around the opening tragedy where a high school athlete hangs himself on a swing set. And the book sort of ripples outward from there in all directions, trying to figure out not only why he did it, but how it's going to affect his family, his community, his team, and whatnot. Beautifully done. Just beautifully done. If I can find the review that I wrote of this 11 or 12 years ago when it first came out, I will gladly reprint it down below. I'm having, as you can tell from my tone of voice, a little bit of trouble finding a lot of these things. I am suddenly now in a position where I have to annotate videos, and that I'm not accustomed to that. And it's acquainting me with how spotty that process is. Things that I'm assuming I can find easily, I can't find at all. Which sort of sets on edge my idea about the internet being forever. Okay, this next one is by Stephen Neal. It's called Anglicanism. It's an old, I think, pelican or penguin. Okay, this is a pelican. This is an old pelican paperback. about Anglicanism. There you have Henry VIII, who hovers over Anglicanism. This is from middle of the 20th century. Stephen Neale was an Anglican bishop, I believe, and just writes a scholarly but very accessible introduction to Anglicanism. What is it? Where does it come from? Everybody knows a rough thumbnail idea of where it comes from, but where does it really originate doctrinally? And what is it? What is it as a faith? And I recall it when I haven't read it since I had this copy, but I remember it being not only scholarly, but really, really good, really, really readable. What else we got here? Oh, okay, this was a big thing from Ashgate Books. This is called Rich Apparel by Maria Hayward, and it's about clothing in the Tudor era of the 16th century, the 16th century Tudor era. Not just the end of the century, which has all the famous examples, but also all through the century, and not just pictures, Holbein and whatnot, but what it means, what clothing meant, what it was meant to signal, how it was made, how it was purchased, whether or not there were secondhand markets, to what extent it was comfortable. the author manages to cover a lot of that ground. It's a really good job. And I think, once again, I wrote about this. There was a time, I think this came out in the mid-2000s, and there was a time there where I let no Tudor book go by. I wrote about all of them. And so if I can find it, I will link it down below. Then we have Peter Matthiessen, great novelist Peter Matthiessen, who also was a great nature writer. And here he teams up with Hugo van Lawick. This must be from the 70s. This is Sand Rivers. Can we get the color to leach in there? There we go. This is Sand Rivers, where the author went to the Selous Game Reserve in Tanzania, it's big and wild. When they did this, it was even bigger and even wilder. I believe this book was done in a golden era before poaching became really industrialized and really comprehensive and just laid waste to all of the national parks and game preserves all over Africa. I think this was right before then, because, well, we won't go off on a socioeconomic tangent, but poaching explodes when there's no economy anywhere else. Poaching's dangerous. Most game wardens, most poaching agents, and most big tourist attraction game preserves all over Africa are perfectly within their legal rights to shoot you dead on sight. And poachers know that. But poaching offers them a year's worth of money for one afternoon, if it works. And that wasn't true, I think, when this book was done. So, and it's a larger thing. It's full of color photographs. Hugo van Lawick was a fantastic photographer. And Peter Matthiessen is great writing about animals. He captures a million different moments here. The Selous Game Reserve goes on forever. And when this book was being composed and coming out, it was a pretty wild place. There are some places in Africa now, I believe, where you can, if you are certifiably insane, and yet they have waiting lists, so there are people who are certifiably insane. There are places in Africa now, game preserves in Africa now, where if you are certifiably insane, you can sign up for an on-foot safari, where you have a couple of guides who are told you will never work, not just in game preserves, but anywhere on the continent of Africa, if you shoot one of our megafauna, under any circumstances whatsoever, including to save your own life. Now, they'll do it if they have to, but they know it'll be the end of their life as they know it, so they don't want to, so they're going to be very hesitant, which you don't want the only person in the group with a gun to be if a 7-ton animal is mad at you. And if you have a Jeep or a bus of some kind, at least you have something on your side. And yet, on-foot safaris, when I was traveling in Africa, I came across a couple of them once in a while, including the Regulation 1 on-foot safari, where they were pretty much carrying one of their members who'd been bitten on the ankle by something. She felt terrible. I don't think it was probably poisonous. She was probably just having a hysterical reaction. But I don't understand on-foot safaris. But this was at a time, this book was done at a time when you would not have wanted to do that in the Selous Game Reserve because it had massive herds of elephants. And pretty, if I remember correctly, at this time, a pretty rambunctious lion population as well. Beautiful, though. just incredibly beautiful. So if you get a chance, if you're going to Africa and you're thinking about it, you might want to think about it. And I would love to have the book. This is the thing I'm going to think about for these bygone library tours, is that I don't have a lot of these books. Okay, this next one is science fiction fantasy. Terrific, terrific series by Eric von Lustbader, who a lot of you will know for his kind of jet-setting, current-day, contemporary thriller-type novels. But he wrote a science fiction trilogy that was really, really good. It's the Sunset Warrior trilogy. This is book 1, called The Sunset Warrior. And this is kind of weird, just as another digression. This is kind of weird example. This is not the original cover artwork for The Sunset Warrior. Sunset Warrior was issued as, I believe, a paperback original. And it had different cover artwork that was beautiful. And this is also beautiful. That almost never happens. A, that a science fiction series would get reprinted at all. And B, that the requisite cover art change would be good or equal. Usually the reprints end up looking absolutely awful. But these reprints were wonderful. The originals were also wonderful. This is a story of an ecologically devastated Earth. All life has moved below the surface, and our main character the life has moved below the surface and become very violent, very feudal. And our main character is not only named, but also is a Ronin. He is a freelance sword for hire. And as soon as the book starts, that the action is going to go topside, that you're going to get a chance to explore the surface of this Earth. Really good stuff. Very well written, very tense, very lean and fast moving, which is weird for me to think about because I don't associate it with Eric von Lustbader's other fiction. I associate it with his science fantasy series. What I wouldn't give to find all 3 of these in mass market, in either the original cover artwork or these. Does it say? Does this reprint actually give me? No, it doesn't. Though I can almost remember the author's name, or the artist's name here, almost, because it's a distinctive style. Then we have Mark Moffat, did an oversized illustrated book called High Frontier. And there you can see what the book is about. It's about the upper canopies of Earth's forests. Way up above the forest floor, where this was done, I think, in the 80s. And the author says in his introduction to this book, even back then, that people don't study that world. They study the parts of the trees that are easy for them to reach, and they study the forest floor. And he changed that. He built harnesses and got way up into the upper canopies, where there are species of insects, species of lizards, species of bats that in 100 generations, they have never gone below even the middle of the tree, much less, they don't even know the forest floor exists. Those species don't even know that. The trees, the leaves, the foliage, way up in the upper canopy like that, often evolves cupped shapes that hold rainwater. And whole niches of animals live on the basis of that. Animals hunt up there, reproduce up there, and nest and grow old up there. And the only time for generation after generation that they ever encounter the forest floor is when they die and fall there. And this author decided to go up and look at that world. Completely fascinating and beautifully illustrated. And the subject might strike you as familiar, some of you, because there was a new book last year called The Arbornaut, about a woman who had coined the term Arbornaut and who also did a huge amount of exploring in the upper canopies of Earth's forests, just to see what kind of life was up there and how different it was from its counterparts lower down in the world. This book was on my mind when I read and reviewed Arbornaut, and this book was on my mind because the author of Arbornaut is a little too fond in her book of saying that nothing like what she was doing had ever been done before, when, of course, I read and reviewed a book on the exact same subject 40 years ago. Then we have a couple more, and then we'll be done with this installment of the library tour from the dim and distant past. This is by Robert Arthur Smith. I think this might be from the 70s. It's called Vampire Notes. And it was an old mass market paperback, a vampire novel in which a struggling screenwriter is told by a millionaire that he wants to produce his screenplay. He wants to make a big movie out of his screenplay. But a lot is going on on the set of that movie. There's a vampire on the set of that movie. Obviously, that's not a spoiler. But there's also lots of other stuff, too. There are monsters and ghosts and also human versions of monsters, human versions of ghosts, and human versions of parasites, much like vampires. And as you can tell, probably from my tone of voice, it's not the schlock that it first seems. It actually reads better. This sticks out in the mind as a good contemporary vampire novel. I've read a lot of them, and most of them aren't good. Most of them are really bad, but this one stands out. If I as you know, as I say on this channel, I'm not all that in love with mass market paperbacks anymore. But if I saw this, I would grab it. I'm pretty sure it never existed in any other format. And then we'll finish up this time around with a classic. I mentioned that Fat City is really, really good. It's a really, really good novel. Nova is also a really, really good novel. And I consider God Knows to be the greatest thing that Joe Heller ever wrote. I know he's immortal and will be forever for Catch-22, but there's nothing, I don't think there's anything anywhere in his oeuvre that has the punch of God Knows. God Knows is a book written by a great author who suddenly realizes that he can be the greatest author in the world. He can be, in fact, the author of Catch-22, and he's still going to get old, and he's still going to be heartbroken, and he's still going to die. God Knows is a book written by that author. For all the brilliance that he brought to Catch-22, he couldn't write that book, right? Because he wasn't that person yet. So I mentioned those fictional entrees. But this last one kind of outclasses them all. This is one of the great novels of the second half of the 20th century. This is Women and Men by Joseph McElroy. I don't know if you're going to be able to make that out there. This was an old, fat trade paperback that I had. I don't have this book at all in any format now. I think it's been reprinted relatively recently in a fairly nice paperback edition. This is just a sprawling novel of relationships and bitterness and New York City and a whole era, the 1970s. It's just a sprawling, brilliant, brilliant novel that isn't enough talked about. It isn't enough reprinted. There ought to be a Library of America volume here. There ought to be Every Man's Classic or a Modern Library or something like that. I don't think that it's ever had that treatment at all from any of those houses. And that might not be the book's fault. It might be that this is one of those cases where there's a literary estate that's basically a 90-year-old widow or a widow's sister who hates everybody and has all sorts of paperwork under her bed. That happens. But it'd be a shame. If that was true in this case, it would be a shame. In this case, I fault the literary estate and the printing for the fact that most people have not heard of this book. They should. And if there were a smart literary estate behind this, they would have. But one way or another, I don't have it anyway, except here. So that is a little bit of a bygones library tour, a library tour that I don't need to go through my own shelves for now that I'm here in Vermont. And there are more of these because I prepared ahead of time. So I'll wrap this up for now, but we'll be going down memory lane tomorrow. Thank you, BookTube.